Let's talk about tithing. You've probably heard it's about giving 10% of your income to God. But have you ever wondered why 10%? Where does this idea come from? And the big question, does tithing still matter today? In this video, we're going to unpack what the Bible really says about tithing. We'll look at where it started, what Jesus had to say about it, and how it applies to us now. Stick around and you might be surprised by what we uncover. The first time we see tithing in the Bible is with Abraham, back when he's still called Abram, in Genesis 14. Let me explain what's happening here. Abram had just returned from rescuing his nephew Lot and defeating some enemy kings. It was a big victory. On his way back, he meets a man called Melchizedek, the king of Salem and a high priest of God Most High. Melchizedek blesses Abram, and what does Abram do? He gives him a tenth of everything. Now here's the thing. Abram wasn't told to do this. There were no laws about tithing yet. He gave 10% as a way to honor God and say, "You're the one who gave me this victory." The word for tithe in Hebrew is masa, which means a tenth. But in biblical culture, the number 10 symbolized completeness. So when Abram gave a tenth, it wasn't just about a percentage. It was a way of saying, "God, everything I have belongs to you." Now, isn't that beautiful? The first tithe was an act of worship, not a rule. Now, fast forward to the time of Moses, and tithing becomes a formal command. In Leviticus 27, God says, "Every tithe of the land is holy to the Lord." Now, the word holy here is key. In Hebrew, it's kodesh, and in Aramaic, it's kadisha. It doesn't just mean sacred, it means set apart for God's purposes. So the tithe wasn't just any portion, it was a special part that belonged to God. Now, why was this important? Well, in Numbers 18, we see that the tithe was used to support the Levites, the tribe responsible for the work in the tabernacle. The Levites didn't have their own land or a way to earn income, so the tithe made sure they were provided for while they focused on serving God. But here's something that stands out. Tithing wasn't just about duty. It was also meant to be joyful. In Deuteronomy 14, God told the Israelites to use part of their tithe for a feast in His presence. It says, "You shall eat the tithe, that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always." So tithing wasn't only about giving things away. It was a way of celebrating God's blessings and trusting Him for the future. But what happens when people stop tithing? In Malachi 3, God confronts His people about this. He says, "Will man rob God? Yet you are robbing me." But you say, "How have we robbed you?" "In your tithes and contributions. Bring the full tithe into the storehouse and see if I will not open the windows of heaven for you and pour down for you a blessing." Now, the word rob here doesn't just mean stealing. It's about holding back something that rightfully belongs to someone else. God's not saying, "Give me your money because I need it." He's saying, "This is already mine, and by holding it back, you're breaking your trust with me." But here's the amazing part. God invites them to test Him. He says, "Bring the full tithe and see what I'll do." This is one of the few times in the Bible where God actually says, "Try me." Tithing isn't just about money. It's about faith. It's about saying, "Lord, I trust you to provide for me." Now, some people say tithing is just an Old Testament thing. But let's look at what Jesus said. In Matthew 23, He's talking to the Pharisees. These guys were very strict about tithing, even down to tithing herbs like mint and dill. But Jesus says to them, "You tithe mint and dill and cumin, but you neglect justice, mercy, and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others." Did you catch that? Jesus says they should have tithed, but their priorities were off. He wasn't telling them to stop tithing. He was telling them to do it with the right heart. Justice, mercy, and faithfulness matter too. It's not just about the act of giving, it's about living in a way that honors God. This brings us to an important question. Do tithes belong specifically to the local church? In the Old Testament, tithes were brought to the storehouse, which was tied to the temple. The Levites and priests used the tithe to maintain worship, teach God's word, and care for the poor. In Numbers 18, God says, "To the Levites I have given every tithe in Israel, in return for their service in the tent of meeting." Malachi 3 reinforces this by saying, "Bring the full tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house." The tithe was centralized, supporting the place of worship and its leaders. In the New Testament, Paul echoes this principle. In 1 Corinthians 9, he says, "Those who proclaim the gospel should get their living by the gospel." He compares the support of church leaders to Old Testament system of supporting the Levites. While the Bible doesn't explicitly say tithes must only go to the local church, it's clear that this church is the spiritual storehouse for most believers. It's where we are spiritually fed, and it's where resources are used to further God's work. That being said, the Bible also encourages generosity beyond the local church. In Acts 4, believers gave to meet the needs of the community. And in 2 Corinthians 9, Paul talks about cheerful giving, whether it's to the church or to those in need. So while the local church should be a primary focus for our tithes, God calls us to a lifestyle of generosity that extends even further. So, does tithing still matter today? The Bible never says tithing was cancelled. In fact, Jesus affirmed it, and the principle of giving God our first fruits, the best and the first, still applies. Proverbs 3 says, "Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruit of all your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty." Tithing is about more than money. It's about trust. It's about saying, "God, I'm putting you first and I trust you'll take care of the rest." And here's the amazing part. When we tithe, we get to be part of God's work. It's about honoring Him, blessing others, and making an eternal impact. So what do you think about tithing? Is it something you practice, or are you considering starting? Let me know down in the comments because I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if this video helped you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.